Greetings everyone, my name is Stefan and welcome back to part 10 of the Ultimate Guide to Stellaris. In this video, we'll be talking about the most exciting topic of Stellaris, that being warfare. Now you might be asking, war? What is it good for? And to that I'll say, absolutely anything. Warfare is extremely useful as a tool to enforce your will upon the galaxy, and is also very useful to secure more territory for yourself after you're done expanding initially. You might be able to expand very significantly early game, but either way you will hit a limit, and that limit is going to be another empire. With that other empire you can either make a pact, trade, do stuff like that. Ultimately though, transactions with another empire are not as efficient as just taking their territory and exploiting their resources yourself. To achieve our goal of conquering or humiliating or even subjugating the enemy, we're going to need to first build up some defenses and some offenses. I highly suggest that you build up some defensive stations because these things are really cheap, and for example, if you build something up with just a starport and 2 hangar bays, you'll be able to achieve pretty high levels of fleet power. The station, which only has 2 hangar bays and this communications jammer, is 2.4k even though it costs 300 alloys. With 300 alloys you can't really build much of a fleet, but you can build a mighty station. Even if you have 4 more choke points, it's more efficient to build up stations on choke points and have a smaller fleet to be able to support those choke points. That is of course if you're on the defensive, but the same principle applies even if you're on the offensive as well. The first thing you will want to do in a war is lure the enemy towards your station to try to take on as much of their fleet power as possible. That way you can use these hyper efficient and hyper powerful stations to your advantage. Of course you can only do that in the early to late game. In the end game stations don't really matter, but by the point you're reaching the end game, things are going to be looking very different, so we'll just focus on the early game war for now. In early game war, there are going to be 4 primary means of damage dealing. The first way is of course the station, which is hyper efficient and can be captured by the enemy to turn on you. The other 3 methods are going to be corvettes, destroyers, and cruisers. Cruisers are relatively early game, so I'll cover them in this video, but if you don't have cruisers yet, corvettes and destroyers will do the job nicely. These things are expensive, and so you'll need quite a few alloy foundries to be able to actually build up a sizable fleet. Once you build that fleet, you'll also need a sizable amount of alloys to maintain it, and so it's usually best to build up a fleet just before a war, because otherwise you'll be spending too many resources on just keeping a fleet around that's not doing anything useful. Since we are about to go to war, let's design the best ship that we can, and in our case, since we have access to cruisers, we're going to be able to design a very nice cruiser. With cruisers, you want to go for one of 2 things. Either you go for medium weapon slots with the best weapon that you can get, or you go for the hangar bays. Or in fact, you can go for both, medium weapon slots and hangar bays. If you don't know anything about designing ships, cruisers are the first place where you really need to learn it, because you will want to designate the cruiser to be a carrier with the hangar core. With hangar cores, you'll be able to put on strikecraft, and as of 2.6.2, strikecraft are the most powerful thing in the game by far. Early on, strikecraft will shred small ships, and even if they have some point defense, strikecraft will be able to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. After you put the hangar bay on your cruiser, you should also designate the combat computer to be of a carrier. That way this ship will engage from a longer range, and the strikecraft will have longer to actually engage and destroy the enemy. This cruiser design is extremely powerful, and if you can get access to that early on, you'll be good to go. Otherwise, you'll just have to spam a bunch of corvettes and destroyers. Now, while there is something to be said about mixing up your ships, and having a mix of cruisers, corvettes, and destroyers, it's generally best to just build the best ship that you can, and in our case, it's gonna be cruisers. In times of war, if you need to, you can sell some resources and buy some alloys from the market, but the prices quickly rise up, so you will generally want to have a military-industrial complex of your very own. In our case, our military-industrial complex consists of only a single alloy foundry, and so we're not really able to produce that many cruisers. These 4 cruisers should be enough to defend the TRM system in case these guys attack, but if we wanted to attack, we would need a lot more cruisers. For that, we will want to start building some alloy foundries, and generally early on, if you have a dedicated alloy foundry world, you're going to be pretty much good to go in terms of fleet power. Otherwise, you're going to have to turn to my previous video and try diplomacy. Once you do get your fleet built, however, you're going to want to make sure that their fleet power is sufficient to actually take on the enemy. You generally want to go ahead and check out the enemy's fleet power equivalency, and if they are equivalent or worse, you can attack them. If they are superior, it's quite risky, but it is still possible. But anyways, we are pretty much ready for war. We have our fleet stationed at the Tyrium system, we are ready to attack the Varian coalition, and in fact, we have even stationed our ships very close to the hyperlane so that it's faster to attack these guys. Once you are ready to go to war, you have to make sure to justify it. So for that, you will need a casus belli. A casus belli is pretty much a reason to go to war, and in our case, we can either conquer them, humiliate them, or make them a tributary or vassal. To have a conquer war goal, we have to have a few claims on their systems, and it's generally best to claim their systems before war because otherwise they're going to be too expensive. If they are rivaling us, we can go for the humiliate war goal, which will give us 100 influence at the end of war, as well as reduce their influence and happiness. If you have the opportunity to go for humiliate, definitely go for it. Your claims will stay the same, and if at the end of the war you have all the territories that you have claimed captured, you'll be able to keep them at the end of the war. Same applies for tributary and vassalization. However, at the end of these wars, if you manage to actually complete it and enforce the war goal, you'll gain either a tributary or a vassal. A tributary will give you 25% of their energy and mineral income per month, and a vassal will support you in terms of any wars. Vassals can also be integrated into your empire, so you can spend some influence and actually annex them completely. Ideally, you should be going for the vassalized goal, only if you're planning on actually integrating them, because AI is quite useless as an ally, and once they become your vassal, they will lose all their AI bonuses. In this situation, we only have the conquer claim war goal, but we do have the option of inviting other empires to this war. You can only really invite empires if they are also hostile to the enemy that you're about to attack, so in our case, we don't have any allies to invite. So let's just declare war and see how this is going to go. So obviously we have this war progress screen in the bottom right corner, and in war progress, the most important thing to keep in mind is war exhaustion. As war goes on, your population will become more and more tired of the war, especially if you're on the losing side. As war progresses and you lose more and more ships, your war exhaustion will eventually reach 100%. At that point, the enemy can actually force a status quo on you, and a white peace would be signed. In that situation, any systems that you have captured that you have claims on will go to you. Any systems that they have captured that they have claims on will go to them, and overall it's going to be a mess if it's forced status quo. To prevent that, you want to cause them more damage than they cause to you, and ultimately be the one that is actually forcing a status quo on them. However, the forced status quo may not even be necessary. If you drive the enemy down the gutter enough, you'll be able to just offer a status quo, and if acceptance is positive, they'll automatically accept. However, if you want to actually enforce the war goal that you started with, you have to achieve a lot more war score, and you have to be a bit more successful in a war. Due to this, unless your war is one-sided, you'll generally want to be settling status quos. At this point though, we can see that the enemy is quite reluctant to do so, and that's partly because they have a bigger fleet. So let's go smash theirs. When moving our fleet, we'll want to generally prioritize their stations, because their stations are the ones that contain the good stuff. The stations the enemy has will be one of three things. Either they will be defensive stations, anchorages, which provide more naval capacity, or shipyards. You want to go for the enemy's shipyards because once you destroy their shipyards, they will not be able to reinforce. And so, we're going to advance and try to take on the systems which have the most shipyards. This thing right here will probably be a defensive station, although it is not entirely powerful, with only 1.2k fleet power. Oh, before we proceed, I have to mention that this station has an FTL inhibitor, which prevents me from just going around the station and going to the other ones. Really early on, empires won't have access to FTL inhibitors, and so in your first couple wars, you can actually just avoid stations altogether. But in our case, we have to engage every single one, because they will otherwise prevent us from going through. As you can also see here, carriers are absolutely amazing when it comes to destroying stations because they stay out of range, and our carriers just pummel them with ships. By the way, as you move on and capture stations, you'll notice that the resources they produce will actually start going to you. So the more systems you capture, the better off you're going to be. Being better off is very important when going to war, because if your economy collapses during a war, your fleets won't be nearly as powerful, so you also have to micromanage your planets while moving your fleets during war. You cannot abandon your empire while you're moving out your fleet, because otherwise your fleet will suffer and you will die. Alright, looks like we have met their main fleets. Seems like they have quite a few fleets bunched up together, AI seems to do that in 2.6, but our ships should be sufficient to take these guys on. So let's engage. Alright, looks like they have quite a bit of point defense, but even then our strike craft are doing work. Although clearly there's more of them than there are of us. Now, since we are playing with cruisers, we're not actually going to lose too many cruisers in this battle, and instead we're going to be able to retreat to a station that we own. Ideally, you want to set the station that is furthest ahead to be your home station. That way the fleet will take less time to actually retreat, and will be in the action much quicker. So let's go ahead, retreat. We have not lost any ships from this, and in a few years they will return. In fact, it will only take a couple months for it, because they are only a few systems away. As you can see here though, even though we lost the battle and were forced to retreat, we caused more war exhaustion to them than they caused to us. This means that they will reach 100% war exhaustion sooner, and will be able to enforce the status quo very quickly. Once we do, we will gain a single system because we have that single system claimed. All the other ones we have not laid claim to yet, and now since we're at war, it's going to cost quite a bit more to actually claim them. So let's do that anyway, and now as you can see here, we'll gain 3 systems from the status quo instead of just 1. You can make claims during war, however, it's better to just make them beforehand, and then try to capture the systems afterwards. With that, we'll be able to secure these systems, and take them at the end of the war. Now we can also try to go for a couple planets, and in fact, let's go for this one system. Getting a system with a planet is just as easy as getting a normal system, except you also have to conquer the planet with armies. Armies are not something you should be really concerned about, and you can actually just build these guys during a war. It's better to build up a massive fleet right before war, and then build armies during a war. That way you can spend all your resources on a massive fleet, and you can do a big, massive first strike. After all, when you're just beginning a war, the only thing that matters are fleets. Armies are for later, and by delaying our army construction, we're able to allocate more resources to our fleet. Armies overall don't matter too much, and as long as you have some armies, you'll be doing great. It doesn't matter that your armies are weak and cheap, because as we know from history, enough bodies thrown at a problem will generally solve it. Alright, looks like our station is under attack. That is actually good, because the first strike is done against the station, and our fleet can come in afterwards and destroy the rest of the fleet. Now all we really have to do is chill at the station and wait until the war is over. We have seized all the systems that we've originally claimed, and now as long as we hold out and keep them, the status quo will grant them to us very easily. Whenever possible though, you will want to still go out and raid their systems, and in fact, what we could do right now is build up a small raiding fleet and just take all of these systems while these guys have their fleets only in the north. Capturing enemy systems will drive them closer to a status quo, and as you can see here, waiting a little bit and capturing a couple systems drove us closer to the status quo. So let's agree to that, send the offer, and since it's positive, these guys will accept. Now we have all this territory, it belongs completely to us, and we also have access to the planet. Now if we did not capture the planet itself, the system would remain in their hands, and the same would happen if we just captured the planet, but they retook the system. To capture a system with a planet, you have to have both the planet and the station itself. But now that we've done this war, we are a little bit bigger, and now our splotch of red paint is a little bit bigger on the galactic map, and that is of course very good. But anyways, that about does it for the war video, and now you guys should know pretty much everything you need to know to take the game, start playing, and start dominating. Big special thanks to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring this video series, and big special thanks to all my Patreon supporters, who from now on will get all the guides one day early. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, for sticking around, and I'll see you guys soon. I'll be uploading a civics tier list updated for 2.6.